Widow buys 2 wild mountain man. Then he whispered something only her husband ever said. 1871, Wyoming Territory. The sky over Partridge Hollow was the color of scorched tin, wind carving dry whirls through the dust as the clang of a bell echoed down Main Street. The town's men had gathered for something less than holy, their spurs ringing with every step, their boots caked in the same mud that had once swallowed their honor during the war. In the center of it all stood a makeshift platform, nailed together from old coffin wood. A sign hung above it, swinging faintly in the breeze. Auction, debts, criminals, wild men. Sold to settle dues. The crowd roared like wolves around fresh kill. Old ranchers with whiskey on their breath, broken soldiers, and bounty hunters flicking knives between their fingers. And through them all walked a woman wrapped in black. Elsa Garrison. No one called her by name. They called her Widow. Ghost Bride. Crazy Elsa if they were drunk enough. 32. Tall. Shoulders square. Hair braided and pinned beneath a mourning veil. Her face was too calm to be soft, and her hands too callous to be delicate. There was no ring on her finger anymore, just a pale indent on her skin, as though grief had branded her in place of gold. They said she lost her husband on a hunt 2 winters back. Said he vanished in the canyons. Some claimed wolves took him. Others said bandits. But none brought back a body, and none had seen her cry. Now she stood among hoots and hollers, her boots unmoving in the dust, watching the sheriff drag a man into the light. He wasn't chained. He was leashed. Rope across his neck, shackles on his wrists. Bare-chested, barefoot, half man, half shadow. Hair matted, beard thick and wild. Bites on his forearm. Scratch marks down his spine like something tried to peel the skin from him in his sleep. Silas, the sheriff grunted, tossing the name like a curse. No last name. Caught him living in a cave past Devil's Ridge. Ran with a wolf pack, they say. Didn't talk. Didn't eat unless it was raw. The crowd laughed, spat, jeered. Too wild to break. Bet he eats nails for breakfast. Hell, I'll pay just to see him try and cook something. The sheriff raised a hand. Starting bid, $5. No refunds if you choose off your hand. Men chuckled, shuffled, but none stepped forward. Then a single boot step echoed. Steady, crisp. Elsa moved past the drunks and the leering cowhands, her black veil fluttering like a shadow in motion. She stepped onto the stage, not rushed, not nervous, and looked Silas in the eyes. He didn't blink. His eyes were the color of ash and old wounds. Cold, but not hollow. Elsa reached in her coat. The silver coins in her hand didn't jingle. She handed them to the sheriff with a voice so low, it nearly disappeared beneath the wind. I'll take him. Silence. The kind that cracked through bone. A few in the crowd laughed. One man muttered, "She's finally lost it. Bought herself a dog who bites." The sheriff raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, you sure? I don't repeat myself." He took the coins. Shrugged. "He's yours now. But just so you know, last fella who tried to shackle him ended up with teeth marks in his throat." Elsa turned, her eyes never leaving Silas's. "I don't plan to chain him." They walked through town together, her leading the reins, him following barefoot in the dust, blood crusted on his wrists, the crowd parting like they feared whatever spirit she was summoning from hell itself. Not a word passed between them. Not one soul dared stop her. The homestead. Hours later. Lightning rolled across the horizon as they reached the edge of her land. An old timber ranch nestled near the woods, barely standing through last winter. The paint had peeled. The windows were patched with old cloth. But the barn still stood, and smoke curled from the chimney like breath from a buried heart. Elsa stepped off the wagon, loosened the rope around his wrists without a word, and nodded toward the structure near the creek. "You can sleep there. The barn's dry." Silas didn't move, didn't growl. He looked toward the trees first, the ones bending in the rising wind, then at her. For the first time, he opened his mouth. His voice was deep, broken like a rock slide, but soft, careful. Storm's not the danger. She froze. Her breath stopped. Her hand, mid-motion, stayed hovering near her coat. Because she'd heard those exact words before, whispered in the dark, whispered in her bed, whispered by the man she buried with nothing but a ring and a nameplate. Storm's not the danger. It's what follows it. The wind hit the ranch like a warning. Trees swayed. The door to the barn creaked open behind Silas, as if summoned. Elsa didn't speak. Silas stepped inside, into shadow. She stood at the fence post long after he was gone from sight, hand trembling at her side, not from fear, from memory, and from something colder, something that didn't have a name yet. Morning broke gray and silent. Frost covered the wooden slats of Elsa's cabin like lace left by a ghost. The world outside looked untouched, save for the sound of rhythmic thuds, measured, powerful, alive. She stepped outside, coat drawn tight, eyes scanning the treeline. Silas stood at the chopping block, bare-chested despite the cold, driving an axe into logs like he was splitting time itself. Muscles flexed across his scarred back, layered with lash marks, claw gouges, burns. His breath steamed in the cold. He said nothing, just lifted, split, stacked. Elsa lingered. She wasn't watching his body. She was watching his silence. The man barely spoke, never sat at her table, didn't touch her food, slept in a barn, kept to himself. But by the fourth day, the small things began to shift like wind moving through curtains. She found the south fence mended, though she hadn't asked. Her creek, once clogged with old brush, now dammed neatly with stones and driftwood. The mule she could never brush without it kicking, groomed smooth. No words, no request for thanks, only watchfulness. She began to notice his shadow behind her window at night, unmoving, not lurking, standing guard. When she left the cabin in the early dark, there were wolf prints in the snow, but none came close. Flashback. The mountains had looked the same that day. She'd stood on the porch in a faded green dress, her hands in his, James's, as he adjusted the rifle on his back and kissed her temple. "You've got that look," she'd teased. "What look?" "The one you get when you know something bad's coming." He'd smiled, leaned closer, and whispered, "Storm's not the danger. It's what follows it." She'd laughed then, pulled it back for one more kiss. And that was the last time she saw him. Now those same words haunted her in a stranger's mouth. That afternoon, while she gathered kindling by the treeline, Silas stepped to her side, soundless, barefoot in the snow like it didn't bite. She straightened. In the distance, 3 riders crossed the ridge. Slow, careful, eyes on the land. Elsa didn't hesitate. She slung the rifle from her shoulder, cocked the lever. "Bandits," she said flatly. Silas stood beside her. No weapon, just breathing steady. "You don't have to protect me," she muttered, eyes forward. "I wasn't." A beat passed. Then he added, voice low, "One of them used to ride with me." Her knuckles whitened on the rifle. That night, sleep didn't come. She sat beside the cold fireplace, boots still on, staring at the locket she kept on the table. Inside, a tiny portrait and 3 carved letters, JTG, James Thomas Garrison, her husband, the man whose body never came home. The wind howled outside. A branch scratched the window like a warning. She whispered into the dark, more to herself than anyone else. "Why do you know his words?" No answer. Not until a moment later. Not from inside the house, but from outside, barely audible, muffled through the walls like a ghost reaching through timber. "Because I knew him." She didn't grab her coat, didn't grab her gloves, only the rifle. Snow hissed under her boots as she stormed into the barn, slamming the door open so hard the mule startled. The lantern inside cast long, jagged shadows across the hay. Silas sat on a bale, shirtless still, back to her, stitching a tear in his old pants with twine. Her voice cracked like thunder. "Who are you?" He didn't flinch, didn't turn, just answered calmly, like he'd been waiting for her. "I saw your husband die." Elsa raised the rifle, hands trembling. Her breath fogged around her lips. "Don't lie to me." Still, he didn't move. "Say his name." He was silent. "Say it." Silas slowly turned. His face wasn't cruel. It wasn't angry. It was tired, as if the weight he carried had just shifted from his back into the space between them. And then, with a voice like winter wind slipping under a door, he whispered something no one else ever knew. "Elsa Bell." She froze. Her eyes flooded. Only one person had ever called her that, in letters he used to write when he was away hunting. In a way he'd call out to her when the fire was low. A name no one else knew but her and James. Her knees buckled slightly. The rifle dipped. Silas looked down. "I didn't kill him," he said softly, "but I was there when he fell." Elsa's mouth parted, but no sound came. The barn stood still. Even the wind outside seemed to hold its breath. The air shifted before the danger arrived. A stillness swept through the trees, thick and unnatural. Birds took wing without sound. Even the mule whinnied low and retreated toward the fence, as if the wind had turned sharp. Elsa stood at the front steps of the cabin, rifle in hand, senses burning. From the ridge, 3 riders emerged, black coats, dust-caked hats, rifles slung loose and low. Men who looked like they'd crawled from the cracks of hell. And in that moment, Elsa didn't have to look at Silas to feel him behind her. She just knew he was there. The lead rider raised his voice. "Ain't no law out here, widow. Only claim." His eyes landed on Silas. "You still ours, wild man. You belong to dirt and knives." Silas stepped forward, slow, deliberate, his boots crunching frost. He didn't reach for a weapon, didn't flinch, just stared with that same primal stillness he wore like skin. "I belong to no man," he said. The bandits laughed. One cocked his rifle. "Then you die like one." The first shot cracked the silence. Elsa dropped to her knee and fired, clean through the shoulder of the man on the left. He toppled backward off his horse, screaming. Chaos ignited. The second bandit dismounted in a lunge, charging with a knife. Silas didn't wait. He met the man halfway. No weapon, just fury. His body slammed into him like a bear. They crashed to the dirt in a flurry of limbs. Fists flew, bones cracked. Blood painted the frost red. The knife flashed. Elsa shouted, "Silas." It was the first time she'd said his name, not with distance, not with caution, but with something else. The blade struck Silas's side. He grunted but didn't stop. He bit the man's ear, slammed his head into the ground, again and again, until he stopped moving. Elsa turned to the third. He was gone, galloping back toward the ridge, dust trailing behind like smoke from fire barely out. Silence returned in pieces. One bandit moaned, dying slow. The other was still. Silas stumbled toward the barn, clutching his side, blood soaking through his shirtless ribs. Elsa ran to him, knees hitting dirt beside the wide doors. "Lay down, don't move." He did, breathing hard, face pale. She tore the hem from her black dress, pressing it into the wound. Her hands moved quickly, steady despite the tremble inside her. He looked up at her, his eyes full of something raw, almost boyish in pain. "I ain't yours," he muttered, lips cracked. She looked down at him. "You're not property," she said softly. "Not mine. Not theirs." Night fell with heavy silence. The fire crackled inside the barn, not bright, not warm, just enough to hold the dark at bay. Elsa sat beside him, wiping blood from his chest, careful not to disturb the bandages. He winced once, not from pain but shame. His voice, when it came, was low and full of ghosts. "I was a scout, worked with the army, took men through canyons I knew better than my own mind." Elsa didn't interrupt. "Your husband, James, he was part of a 10-man unit. Got sent to cut through Black Elk Pass. But someone tipped the Apache. They were waiting. Burned everything. He stopped, eyes on the fire. I pulled him out, carried him 2 miles with his chest open. He made me stop, said he couldn't feel his legs. A long breath. He looked me in the eyes, blood coming up his throat, and said, 'Tell her I died brave.'" Silas wiped a hand down his face, as if he could erase the memory by force. "But I didn't. I couldn't. I wasn't strong enough to see your eyes then." Elsa's face was wet. She didn't remember crying. She whispered, "So you became a ghost." He nodded once, easier than speaking. She touched his shoulder, not as a nurse, not as a widow, as a woman who finally understood the weight of silence. "You brought him home, Silas." Her voice cracked. "That's more than any man could do." She didn't go back to the cabin. Instead, she laid her coat down beside him on the barn's hay floor. They said nothing. No touch, no kiss. Just 2 souls breathing beside firelight, and the long-held grief slowly thawing in the warmth between them. Outside, the sky opened. Snow began to fall, quiet and clean, burying the blood, the footsteps, and everything they didn't say. Time passed, and the snow melted into silence. Spring crept over the Rockies like a secret too tender to speak aloud. The trees budded. The mule grew restless. The earth thawed, and so did the air between them. Silas stayed, not because he had to, but because something deeper than obligation took root in the quiet between their days. He helped raise a new fence line with timber he cut himself, replaced half the barn roof, humming softly to himself in a low gravel hum that reminded her of rivers under ice. He didn't talk much, but he listened to the wind, the animals, and her. Elsa had begun to sing again, not loudly, just small fragments of songs while she watered the beans, brushed the mule, or hung linen to dry. Sometimes she caught Silas watching her from the shadowed edge of the porch, as if memorizing something too fragile to name. They didn't speak of love, but it was there, growing like moss in the silence. The flood came without warning. Heavy rain upstream, snowmelt crashing into the creek like a stampede. By the time Elsa noticed, water was already eating at the far fence. She grabbed a rope and ran, boots sinking in mud, skirts soaked. 2 sheep caught in the current. Her mule panicked, nearly breaking its leg in the paddock. She waded waist deep to the gate, untying the latch, mud pulling at her every step. Crack! The bridge she'd walked over every day groaned and buckled. The center beam split. She tried to run, but the river surged forward, dragging her downhill. A scream tore from her throat as her feet left the earth. And then, hands around her waist, calloused, strong, unyielding. Silas hauled her up from the brink, mud to his knees, shirt soaked through, eyes locked to hers like a tether. She gasped, clinging to him. Water rushed past their boots like wild horses. Shaking, dripping, she said, "I thought you were going to let me fall." His breath fogged the air between them. His voice was quiet, so quiet it cut through everything else. "Storm's not the danger," he said. "It's what follows it." The same words. But this time, they weren't a memory. They were his. And she knew it. That night, as thunder whispered far off in the valley and lightning flickered like old stories across the sky, Elsa sat beside the fireplace in her cotton nightdress. In her hands, the wooden ring box. She opened it one last time. Inside, the band of gold, worn thin where James had rubbed it in nervous habit. She ran her thumb across it, smiled faintly, then set it in the box and closed the lid. She stood, walked to the barn. Silas was there, mending a stirrup in the lamplight. She held the box in her hands like an offering. "I used to belong to grief," she said, voice trembling but certain. "But I think I'm ready to belong to something else." Silas didn't speak at first. He simply set the stirrup down, stood slowly. Then he stepped toward her, the lamp casting long shadows around them. He leaned in and whispered in her ear, low, steady, like memory surfacing, "You smell like rain on cedar." Elsa's breath caught. Her fingers tightened around the ring box. She stepped back, heart racing. "How did you?" He met her eyes, and for the first time, she saw no walls in them. Just memory and presence. "I remembered, from the first time I saw you. With him. I never forgot." Dawn. They stood side by side outside the barn as the morning fog lifted off the hills. The air was cold enough to sting, but she didn't feel it. A hawk circled overhead. The creek still roared in the distance, but the worst had passed. Silas stood tall beside her, arms crossed, a worn blanket around his shoulders. She looked up at him. "You're not wild anymore." He didn't smile, but something in his eyes softened. "Only for you." And that was enough. Clapperboard closing, call to action. Studio microphone, narrator voiceover, as the screen fades to the misty hills. If grief is the weight of love left behind, then maybe healing is what happens when someone carries it with you. If this story moved you, leave a comment below about someone who helped you survive your own storm. Like, subscribe, and share this with someone who believes even the wildest hearts can come home.